I'll be honest, what happened to me still makes my stomach turn, because the morning after my mother's funeral, while her flowers were still dying on my kitchen counter, my husband asked me to move my inheritance into an account I had never seen before. He did not ask gently, not really, although his voice was soft enough to sound loving. He stood beside the coffee maker in our house outside Columbus, Ohio, wearing the same black shirt he had worn to the funeral, and he said we had to be smart now, because my mother would have wanted her money to protect our future. That was the word he kept using. Future. Not grief, not rest, not healing, not take your time, Claire. Future. I was 39 years old, exhausted from watching my mother die slowly in a hospital bed, and I was too broken to notice that my husband was already speaking like a man who had made plans without me. My mother had left me $182,000. It was not millionaire money, but to me, it felt huge, because my mother had spent her life as a nurse, packing lunches, clipping coupons, paying off her small ranch house 1 month at a time, and never buying anything expensive unless it came with a warranty. She used to tell me, "Money does not fix pain, honey, but it can keep pain from turning into panic." I understood that sentence only after she died. The check came 3 weeks after the funeral, folded inside a plain envelope from the attorney's office, and when I held it in my hands, I felt something close to guilt. Because I would have given every cent back just to hear my mother complain about the price of eggs one more time. Daniel, my husband, stood behind me when I opened it. He did not touch my shoulders. He did not ask if I was okay. He just looked at the number. Then he exhaled like someone who had been wading underwater. For almost 15 years, I had believed Daniel and I were ordinary in the way married people are ordinary, meaning tired, sometimes distant, sometimes tender, sometimes worried about bills, but still standing on the same side of life. We had a mortgage, 2 older cars, a teenage daughter who wanted art school, and a son who played baseball like every game was the World Series. Daniel worked in commercial flooring, driving between job sites with dust on his boots and invoices in his truck, while I managed appointments at a dental office and kept our family calendar on the refrigerator like a second job. We were not rich, but we were stable enough that I never questioned the shape of our life. That was my first mistake. Stability can look real from the outside, even when someone inside the house is quietly packing an exit plan. The first time Daniel mentioned investing my mother's money, I was standing in the laundry room, folding towels that still smelled like the detergent she used, because I had taken some from her house before we cleared it out. He leaned against the door frame and said we should not let the money just sit there. I remember that phrase because it sounded practical. Not greedy. Practical. He said the economy was strange, the house needed repairs, college costs were coming, and we had to think like adults instead of letting emotion make the decision. I almost laughed when he said emotion, because my mother had been dead less than a month, and emotion was the only thing keeping me upright. Still, I listened. Daniel had always been better with numbers, or at least I had always let myself believe that. He paid the mortgage online, handled the insurance, called the cable company when rates went up, and talked to our tax preparer every April while I sat beside him nodding like a woman grateful not to understand. Looking back, that was not partnership. That was dependency dressed up as trust. He told me he had found a high-yield account through a private banking contact, something safer than the market but stronger than regular savings, and he said it would be in both our names once everything was finalized. I asked why the account could not be opened at our usual bank. His face changed for half a second. Not enough for me to panic, just enough that I should have paused. Then he smiled and said our bank was fine for checking accounts and birthday money, but this was bigger, and bigger decisions required better options. That night, he brought home takeout from the Thai place I liked, cleaned the kitchen without being asked, and sat beside me on the couch while I cried over a voicemail my mother had left 6 months earlier. He held my hand the whole time. Now I understand that some people comfort you because they love you, and some people comfort you because grief makes you easier to guide. 2 days later, he placed a folder on the kitchen table. There were printed pages inside, neat sticky tabs, highlighted sections, and a pen placed on top like he had prepared for a closing. I remember staring at the folder while our dishwasher hummed behind me, and something in my chest tightened so sharply that I almost pushed it away. Daniel saw it. He always saw hesitation before I even named it. "Claire," he said, in that low voice he used when he wanted to sound patient, "your mom trusted you to make a smart decision, and I am trying to help you protect what she left." That sentence broke me, because he brought my mother into it, because he made the money feel like a test of whether I loved her correctly, because I was so tired of being strong that letting him decide felt like relief. So I signed where he pointed. Not everything. Not blindly, I told myself. Just enough to start the transfer. Just enough to prove I was not frozen by grief. Just enough to let my husband carry something for me. The next morning, I wired $150,000 out of the inheritance account, leaving the rest for what I called breathing room, because some quiet part of me refused to empty it completely. Daniel seemed annoyed by that. Only for a second. Then he kissed my forehead and said I had done the right thing. For the next few days, he became almost too kind. He filled my gas tank, brought me coffee at work, texted me little check-ins, and told the kids to give me space because I was processing grandma. Everyone thought he was being supportive. I thought so too. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, while looking for a receipt in his truck because our son needed cleats before Saturday's game, I opened the center console and found a white envelope tucked beneath a stack of fast food napkins. Inside was a key card, a receipt for a storage unit in Dayton, and a printed rental confirmation for a one-bedroom apartment under Daniel's name. The move-in date was 3 days before my mother's funeral. I stood in the driveway with that envelope shaking in my hand, while the inside of Daniel's truck smelled like old coffee, work dust, and the kind of lie that had been sitting there long before I found it. The rental confirmation looked too clean to be real. 1 bedroom. Dayton, Ohio. 2nd floor. Available parking. Move-in date, May 6th. My mother's funeral had been May 9th. For a few seconds, I could not understand the order of things because my brain kept trying to protect me by rearranging the dates into something less cruel. Maybe it was for a worker. Maybe it was for his company. Maybe it was a short-term rental for a job site. Maybe there was some explanation that did not end with my husband preparing a new life while I was choosing a dress to bury my mother in. Then I saw the storage unit receipt. The name was his. The card used was not our joint card. The address listed under emergency contact was not our home address. It was the apartment. That was when my body understood before my mind did. I dropped the envelope on the passenger seat and stepped back like the truck had caught fire. Inside the house, my son was yelling about his baseball socks, and my daughter was upstairs playing music too loudly, and everything about our home sounded normal in a way that suddenly felt violent. I wanted to scream. Instead, I put the papers back exactly where I found them, closed the console, and walked into the house carrying nothing but the receipt I had originally gone outside to find. Daniel was in the kitchen, slicing an apple with the calm face of a man who had already survived the crime because nobody had accused him yet. He looked up and smiled. "Find what you needed?" I held the grocery receipt in my hand and said yes. My voice sounded normal. That scared me more than crying would have. For the rest of that evening, I watched him like a stranger staying in my house. He asked our son about practice. He told our daughter not to leave wet towels on her floor. He opened the mail. He kissed my cheek while passing behind me at the sink. Every small ordinary thing he did felt like another insult because he performed husbandhood so easily, while somewhere in Dayton there was already a key waiting for him. After the kids went to bed, Daniel sat beside me on the couch and started talking about the money again. He said the transfer had gone through smoothly. He said the account would start earning within days. He said we should feel relieved. I remember staring at the television, not hearing a single word from whatever crime show was playing, while my whole life narrowed down to one question. Why did he need my mother's money if he already had a separate apartment? I turned to him and asked, "Can I see the account login?" He froze. Not dramatically. Not like a guilty man in a movie. Just a tiny pause between breaths. Then he rubbed his jaw and said the platform was being set up through the banking contact, and we would get credentials once the final paperwork processed. I nodded slowly. He relaxed too soon. That was the second thing I noticed. A truthful person does not relax because you stop asking. A truthful person tries to make you feel safe. Daniel reached for my hand, but I moved it under the blanket before he touched me. He noticed that too. For the first time since my mother died, something cold and useful moved through my grief. Not strength exactly, more like survival. The next morning, I called the attorney who handled my mother's estate from the parking lot of the dental office, with my car running and my coffee untouched in the cup holder. His name was Mr. Harlan, and he had known my mother long enough to call her stubborn with affection. When he answered, I almost hung up because saying the words out loud made them real. Instead, I asked whether inheritance money became marital property after I moved it into another account. There was a pause. Then his voice changed. Claire, what exactly did you sign? My throat closed. I told him I was not sure. I told him Daniel had arranged documents. I told him the account was supposed to be in both our names. I did not tell him about the apartment because I still wanted one person in the world to believe I was not living inside something ugly. Mr. Harlan did not raise his voice, but he became very careful. He said I needed copies of every document immediately. He said I should not sign anything else. He said I should call the bank and request confirmation of where the wire was sent. Then he asked one question that made my hands go numb. Did the money go into an account with your name on it? I looked through the windshield at people walking into the office, carrying purses and lunch bags and normal morning problems. I thought it did, I whispered. He did not answer right away. That silence told me enough. At lunch, I called the bank. The woman on the phone was polite, cheerful, almost painfully calm, and she verified my identity while my pulse beat so loudly that I could barely hear her. When I asked for the receiving account information, she said she could confirm only the bank name and the last 4 digits, not the account holder, unless I came into a branch. So I left work early, lied to my manager about a migraine, and drove 20 minutes to our bank with my sunglasses on even though the sky was cloudy. A young banker printed the wire confirmation and slid it across the desk. I stared at the page until the letters stopped moving. The receiving account was not in both our names. It was not even in Daniel's name alone. It belonged to an LLC I had never heard of. Hawthorne Property Solutions. I felt a strange laugh climb up my throat, but it came out broken and small. The banker asked if I was okay. I said yes, because women like me say yes when their lives are falling apart in public. Then I walked to my car, locked the doors, and searched the company name on my phone. At first, nothing came up but a bare business listing, an address in Dayton, and a registration date from 6 weeks earlier. 6 weeks earlier. Before my mother died. Before the funeral. Before the inheritance check. Before Daniel stood in my kitchen and used the word future like it still included me. I clicked deeper, my fingers clumsy and cold. The registered agent was Daniel, but the mailing address was the same apartment from the receipt. And under the business filings, there was another name listed as organizer. A woman named Vanessa Cole. I had never heard her name before, but when I typed it into Facebook, her profile picture loaded before I was ready. She was standing in front of a brick apartment building in Dayton, smiling with her hand on the chest of a man whose face was half cut out of the frame. I did not need to see the whole face. I knew that gray shirt. I had washed it the night before my mother's funeral. I sat in my car outside the bank with Vanessa Cole's Facebook profile open on my phone, staring at that cropped photo until my eyes burned, because the more I looked at the small piece of Daniel's shoulder, the gray shirt, the familiar slope of his neck, the silver watch I had bought him for our 10th anniversary, the more I understood that my marriage had not cracked suddenly after my mother died. It had been rotting quietly while I was still inside it. I did not cry right away, because shock has a strange way of locking the body from the inside, and for several minutes I simply sat there with my hands gripping the steering wheel, watching people walk past my windshield with groceries, bank envelopes, and iced coffees, as if the world had not just split open in front of me. Then my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. Hey, you okay? Kids said you left work early. That message almost made me sick, not because it was cruel, but because it sounded exactly like a husband who cared. I stared at the words and realized that this was the part nobody warns you about when someone betrays you. The lies do not always sound evil. Sometimes they sound warm. Sometimes they sound responsible. Sometimes they ask if you are okay while they are the reason you can barely breathe. I typed back that I had a migraine and needed quiet, then I drove home using side streets because I did not trust myself on the highway, and every red light felt too long, every turn felt unreal. Every ordinary house I passed looked like a place where someone might also be sitting at a kitchen table believing in a life that was already gone. When I got home, Daniel's truck was not in the driveway, so I went straight to our bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled down the blue storage box where we kept old tax returns, insurance papers, warranty booklets, and the kind of adult documents I had always hated reading. My hands moved fast at first, then slower. Because the deeper I dug, the more I noticed little absences that suddenly mattered. The last mortgage statement was missing. So were the most recent bank summaries. The folder for Daniel's business taxes was thinner than it should have been. Even the envelope with our home equity line paperwork was gone, and although I could not remember the last time I had looked inside it, I knew with a cold certainty that Daniel had taken only what he needed me not to see. That was when fear became practical. I took photos of everything still inside the box, then searched his nightstand, the dresser, the laundry basket, the garage cabinet, and finally the glove compartment of my own car, because once trust breaks, even your own house starts feeling like a crime scene. By the time my son came home from practice, I had put everything back exactly as it was, washed my face with cold water, and started dinner like a woman who had not just found a second life growing under her marriage. Daniel came home at 7:30 carrying a white pharmacy bag and a bottle of ginger ale. He said he got them for my migraine. He kissed the top of my head. He asked whether I had eaten. And I remember looking at him over the steam rising from the pasta pot, wondering how many times he had touched me with hands that had already packed boxes for another apartment. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep. Then I took Daniel's old iPad from the drawer in the hallway, the one he had given our son, and then forgotten about after the screen cracked near the corner. It was still logged into his email. I know some people would say I crossed a line right there, but the truth is, the line had been crossed long before I touched that screen. I was just finally looking down and seeing where he had dragged me. At first, there was nothing obvious. No romantic messages. No hotel confirmations. No naked photos. Daniel was too careful for that. But careful people still make small mistakes when they believe the person beside them will never question them. I searched Hawthorne. 3 emails appeared. One was a confirmation from the state business registry. One was from a property management company in Dayton. The third was from an attorney. My throat tightened when I opened it. The message was short, professional, and colder than anything I had ever read. It referenced asset separation, anticipated dissolution, and timing after estate distribution. I read that last phrase 3 times. Timing after estate distribution. Not after my grief. Not after my healing. Not after the funeral. After the money arrived. Daniel had not just betrayed me with another woman. He had waited for my mother to die. That realization did not come like a scream. It came like a heavy door closing slowly in a dark room, because I suddenly understood that every soft word, every coffee, every hand squeeze on the couch, every sentence about protecting our future had been part of something organized, something patient, something planned. Then I saw the attachment. Draft separation agreement. My fingers shook so badly I almost dropped the iPad. I opened it anyway. There it was, my life reduced to clean paragraphs and numbered clauses, with Daniel requesting shared custody, division of marital assets, and confirmation that any funds invested into Hawthorne Property Solutions would be considered voluntarily transferred for mutual financial benefit. Voluntarily. That word made me stand up. I had signed papers while grieving my mother, trusting my husband, and barely sleeping, but on that draft agreement, my pain had been translated into consent. I took photos of every page with my phone. Then I forwarded nothing, printed nothing, moved nothing, because some instinct told me that if Daniel realized I knew, he would clean the evidence before sunrise. I was about to close the email when another message preview appeared at the bottom of the screen. It was from Vanessa. The subject line said, "After she signs, we can finally breathe." For a few seconds, I just stared. Then I opened it. Vanessa had written one sentence. "You promised me the apartment wasn't temporary, Daniel, and you promised the money would prove you were really leaving her this time." My whole body went cold. Not because he had a mistress. Not even because he had planned a divorce. But because those words meant Vanessa knew about me, knew about my mother's money, and knew I was being pushed into signing away the only protection my mother had left me. I stood there in the hallway with the cracked iPad glowing in my hands, listening to Daniel breathing in our bedroom behind a half-closed door, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I understood something that terrified me more than the betrayal itself. I was not only being abandoned. I was being set up. The next morning, I did something that felt almost impossible for a woman who had spent 15 years explaining away small disappointments, because instead of confronting Daniel, instead of begging him to tell me it was all some horrible misunderstanding, I got dressed, kissed my children goodbye, drove to work like usual, then turned around before reaching the dental office and went straight to Mr. Harlan's office with my phone full of photographs and my hands pressed so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles looked white. I had not slept at all. All night, Daniel had breathed calmly beside me, turning once in the dark and resting his hand near my hip, and I had lain there frozen, pretending to be asleep while every piece of my marriage rearranged itself into something uglier than an affair. An affair was painful. A divorce was painful. But what I had found was colder than both. It was strategy. Mr. Harlan's office sat in a brick building near downtown Columbus, with old framed maps on the walls and a receptionist who remembered my mother because she had once brought homemade banana bread after signing her estate documents. When I walked in, the receptionist smiled with that gentle sadness people still gave me after the funeral, and for one terrible second, I almost broke apart right there. Because everyone was still treating me like a grieving daughter while my husband had been treating me like a financial opportunity. Mr. Harlan closed his door after I stepped inside. I handed him my phone without giving a speech. He looked through the photos slowly, his face changing in small ways that frightened me more than shock would have, because lawyers do not react strongly unless something is truly wrong. When he reached the separation agreement, he leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses. That was when I knew. "Claire," he said carefully, "this was prepared before your transfer." I nodded because I had seen the dates, but hearing someone else say it made the room feel smaller. Then he opened the photo of Vanessa's email, read it twice, and stayed silent long enough for the clock on his wall to sound cruel. He finally said, "You need a family attorney, and you need one today." There was no drama in his voice. That made it worse. He explained that inheritance money usually starts as separate property, but that moving it into a joint investment, a business entity, or a marital project could create arguments Daniel's attorney might use later, especially if I had signed documents describing the transfer as voluntary and intended for mutual benefit. I stared at him, trying to breathe through the word voluntary, because it kept returning like a slap. Then he asked whether Daniel had ever mentioned home equity paperwork recently. My stomach dropped. I told him the folder was missing. Mr. Harlan turned to his computer, searched public county records, and within minutes pulled up a document that made my vision blur around the edges. Daniel had taken out a home equity line of credit against our house 2 months earlier. $75,000. My signature was listed on the document. I had never signed it. For a moment, I could not hear anything except the blood rushing in my ears, because there are betrayals that hurt your heart, and then there are betrayals that make you question whether the person beside you has been studying your life like a thief studies a lock. Mr. Harlan did not say the word forgery, but he did not have to. He printed the page, placed it in a folder, and told me not to go home and confront Daniel alone, because people who build quiet financial traps often become dangerous when the trap is exposed. I remember almost laughing at that, not because it was funny, but because Daniel had spent years telling everyone I was emotional, dramatic, too sensitive, always worrying over nothing. Now a 70-year-old estate attorney was telling me my fear had finally caught up to the facts. Before I left, Mr. Harlan made one more search, this time through business filings connected to Hawthorne Property Solutions, and that was when the story stopped being just about an apartment, a mistress, or a man trying to leave his wife with less money. The LLC had already submitted paperwork connected to a small duplex outside Dayton. The purchase price was listed. The earnest money had been paid. The buyer was Hawthorne Property Solutions. And the payment source was the same account where my mother's inheritance had gone. I stared at the screen, reading the address again and again, because my mother had worked night shifts for 30 years, standing on swollen feet in hospital rooms, saving money one careful paycheck at a time. And Daniel had turned her sacrifice into a down payment on a property with another woman. That was the first moment I whispered it out loud. This is insane. But even that was too small. This was not just insane. This was madness. This was madness with paperwork, passwords, signatures, bank accounts, and legal language designed to make me look like I had helped him do it. Mr. Harlan printed everything he could, gave me the name of a divorce attorney he trusted, and told me to preserve evidence quietly, because once Daniel suspected I had proof, the story he told might change fast. I went back to my car with the folder on my lap and sat there feeling like my mother was somehow still trying to protect me through the one man Daniel had not thought to control. Then my phone rang. It was my daughter's school. For half a second, my heart stopped, because when your life is already collapsing, every ring sounds like another disaster. The assistant principal said my daughter, Lily, was in the office and upset, and that she had received a text from Daniel telling her he might be moving out soon because I was not handling Grandma's death well. I closed my eyes. There it was, the next part of his plan. He was not just moving money. He was moving the story. By the time I reached the high school, my daughter was sitting in a plastic chair with her arms folded, her eyes red, her face hard in the way teenage girls become hard when they are terrified and trying not to show it. She looked at me like I was already guilty of something. "Dad said you're going to make this ugly," she whispered. That sentence almost knocked the air from my lungs. I wanted to tell her everything, all of it, right there under the fluorescent lights beside the attendant's desk. But she was 16, and Daniel had already put her in the middle before I even knew there was a battlefield. So I sat beside her, kept my voice steady, and said only that adults sometimes tell children parts of a story when they are scared of the whole truth. She stared at me. For 1 second, I saw doubt flicker across her face. Then her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down. Her expression changed. I asked who it was. She did not answer. She just turned the screen toward me, and there, under Daniel's name, was a message that made my hands go numb all over again. "Don't go home with Mom until I get there. She found something and she's not thinking clearly." I looked at Daniel's message on Lily's phone, and for one quiet second, the hallway around us seemed to pull away, because my husband had not only stolen my mother's money and forged my name on a loan against our home. He was now reaching into my child's mind and trying to turn her fear into a weapon before I could even protect her from the truth. I wanted to scream that he was lying. I wanted to grab the phone and call him right there. I wanted to tell Lily about Vanessa, the apartment, the LLC, the duplex, the forged signature, and every sentence in that email that proved her father had been planning our destruction while we were ordering flowers for her grandmother's casket. But the look on her face stopped me. She was not ready for the whole truth. She was a 16-year-old girl sitting in a school office, holding a phone like it might tell her which parent was safe. And I knew that if I dumped everything on her in that moment, Daniel would use her shock against me before the sun went down. So I swallowed the scream. I placed my hand on the chair between us, not touching her, because she looked like even comfort might feel like pressure. "Lily," I said slowly, "I am not asking you to choose between us, but I need you to understand something very clearly. Your father is scared because I found financial documents I was not supposed to see." Her eyes moved across my face. "What documents?" "Adult documents," I said, though the words tasted weak, "and I am handling them with a lawyer." The word lawyer changed her expression. "Not much. Just enough." She looked down at Daniel's message again, then back at me, and I could see the war happening inside her because she loved him, she trusted him, and yet some part of her knew I was not speaking like a woman losing control. I was speaking like a woman holding herself together with both hands. The assistant principal let us sit in a private conference room until the final bell, and during those 20 minutes, Daniel texted Lily 4 more times, each message softer than the last, each one written to sound worried rather than controlling. I love you. I'm only trying to keep things calm. Mom is overwhelmed. Please wait for me. That last one made my stomach turn because I could hear his voice inside it, gentle and reasonable. The same voice he had used when he told me my mother would want me to protect our future. By the time Lily and I walked to the parking lot, Daniel's truck was already there. He was leaning against the driver's door with his arms crossed, wearing his work boots and the expression of a husband who expected the world to believe him first. Lily slowed beside me. I did not. Daniel pushed off the truck and smiled at her, then looked at me with something colder beneath his face. Claire, he said, like I was embarrassing him in public, you need to stop scaring the kids. I almost laughed, because there it was, the oldest trick in his book. Do something cruel, then call the wounded person dangerous when she reacts. I'm taking Lily home, I said. His jaw tightened. Our home? The way he said it made my skin crawl, because suddenly our house, our mortgage, our marriage, and even our child felt like objects he believed he could still arrange. Lily stood between us, looking smaller than she had in years. Daniel turned toward her and softened his face again. Sweetheart, your mom found something she misunderstood, and now she's making this bigger than it needs to be. That was when I finally looked him straight in the eyes. I found the Dayton apartment. For the first time, his face emptied. Not completely. Not long. But enough. Lily saw it. I know she saw it because her shoulders stiffened before Daniel recovered. He let out a breath and gave a small, wounded laugh, like I had accused him of something ridiculous. That was temporary housing for work. And Hawthorne Property Solutions? I asked. His eyes sharpened. That name hit him harder than the apartment. I felt Lily turn toward him. Daniel lowered his voice. We are not doing this here. No, I said, my hands shaking but my voice steady. We are not doing this through our daughter either. His face darkened then, not with rage exactly, but with the anger of a man whose private script had been interrupted. He stepped closer, and I stepped back only enough to keep Lily behind me. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Lily whispered, Dad, what's Hawthorne? Daniel did not answer her. He looked at me instead, and what I saw in his eyes told me everything Mr. Harlan had tried to warn me about. This man was not sorry. He was calculating. I took Lily home with me because she chose to get in my car, but the ride back was silent in a way that hurt more than any argument could have, because she stared out the window with her phone turned face down in her lap. And I knew childhood was leaving her in pieces with every mile. When we got to the house, I told her to pack a small overnight bag for herself and her brother. She asked why. I said because I needed space to think, and because sometimes space is safer than confusion. She did not argue. That scared me too. I called my son's friend's mother and asked if he could stay there after practice. Then I packed documents, birth certificates, my mother's small jewelry box, 2 changes of clothes, and the folder Mr. Harlan had given me. I did not take wedding photos. I did not take the quilt Daniel's mother had made us. I did not take the anniversary cards I had saved for 15 years. Those things belonged to a marriage I was no longer sure had ever existed. At 6:30, Daniel came home. He did not knock, of course. It was still his house too, or at least that was what the paperwork wanted me to believe. He walked into the kitchen, saw Lily's backpack by the door, saw my packed tote on the counter, and understood immediately that I was no longer waiting for permission to protect myself. What are you doing? He asked. Leaving for tonight. His mouth tightened. With my kids. With our kids, I said, and you can speak to my attorney tomorrow. For a second, he stared at me like he did not recognize the woman in front of him. Then he smiled. It was small, almost sad, and somehow worse than yelling. You really think you're going to win this, Claire? That sentence changed the air in the room. Lily was standing near the stairs, and I saw her hear it. Not the words only. The truth underneath them. Daniel noticed her too late. He turned and softened again, but she was already looking at him differently, as if a curtain had moved and something behind it had finally shown its teeth. My phone rang before he could speak. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. A woman's voice came through, breathless and shaking. Is this Claire? I stepped away from Daniel. Yes. There was a pause, and then the woman said, My name is Vanessa Cole, and I think Daniel lied to both of us. Daniel's face went white. Then Vanessa said the words that made the room spin. He told me you were dying. For a moment after Vanessa said Daniel had told her I was dying, nobody in that kitchen moved, and the silence felt so heavy that even Lily stopped breathing normally beside the stairs, because the lie was so monstrous, so perfectly designed to explain my existence without making Daniel look married, that my mind almost rejected it before the pain could reach me. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at the phone in my hand with a face I had never seen before, not guilty, not ashamed, not broken, but cornered, like a man watching two locked doors open at the same time. Vanessa spoke again, her voice cracking. He said you had a neurological illness, Claire. He said the marriage had been over emotionally for years, but he couldn't leave because your mother was sick, and then because you were sick, and he said he was trying to protect the kids from losing everyone at once. I felt Lily make a small sound behind me. Daniel turned toward her immediately. Lily, don't listen to this. But she did not move toward him. That was the first time all day I saw fear enter his eyes. I put the phone on speaker, not because I wanted to humiliate him, but because he had dragged my daughter into a lie, and I was done letting him control who heard which version of the truth. Vanessa, I said, keeping my voice steady, although my whole body felt like it was shaking from the inside. How long have you known my husband? She inhaled sharply at the word husband. Almost 2 years. 2 years. The number landed quietly, but it cut deeper than shouting would have, because 2 years meant birthdays, school concerts, Christmas mornings, my mother's diagnosis, the long hospital nights, and every exhausted drive home when Daniel had kissed my forehead and told me I was not alone. He had not been absent from our life. He had been dividing himself. Vanessa said they met when Daniel's company worked on the flooring at her office building in Dayton, and at first he told her he was separated, then he told her I was unstable, then sick, then financially reckless, each version changing just enough to keep her sympathy attached to him. He said the inheritance was going into a property for the kids, Vanessa said, her voice turning smaller. He said you agreed because you knew you wouldn't be able to manage things much longer. Lily whispered, Mom. I turned toward her, and the look on her face nearly broke me, because she was not angry anymore. She looked horrified. No, I said softly. None of that is true. Daniel stepped forward. That's enough. His voice had changed. The softness was gone. For 15 years, I had heard that tone only under the surface, buried beneath sighs, jokes, slammed cabinet doors, and little comments about how I worried too much, but now it stood in the room naked. Lily backed up 1 step. That was when I knew we had to leave. I picked up my tote from the counter, kept the phone in my hand, and told Lily to get her brother's backpack from the mudroom. Daniel blocked the hallway. Not fully. Just enough. That is how controlling people work when they still want witnesses to doubt themselves. They do not always shove. Sometimes they simply place their body where your freedom used to be. Claire, he said slowly, you are making a terrible mistake. I looked at the man I had loved, or maybe the man I had imagined loving, and for the first time, I did not search his face for the person he used to be. I searched it for danger. Then I said, move. He laughed once, low and bitter. You think Vanessa is helping you? She's angry because I ended it. From the phone, Vanessa said, you didn't end anything. You asked me yesterday if the duplex could close before Claire hired a lawyer. Daniel's eyes snapped to the phone. There it was again. The real fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing the plan. Lily came back with the backpack clutched to her chest, and when Daniel turned toward her, she lifted her chin in a way that reminded me of my mother so sharply I almost cried. Dad, she said, her voice trembling, move. He stared at her as if she had betrayed him. That was the cruelest part. Not that he had lied to his daughter, but that he still believed her loyalty belonged to him after he had used it. Slowly, he stepped aside. We walked out through the front door with Vanessa still on speaker, my daughter carrying her brother's backpack, me carrying documents, my mother's jewelry box, and the last piece of trust one would ever give that man. I drove to a hotel near the airport because it was bright, busy, and anonymous, and after checking in with shaking hands, I sat on the edge of the bed while Lily locked herself in the bathroom and cried into a towel so I would not hear her. But I heard. Of course I heard. Mothers hear everything when their children are breaking. Vanessa called back 40 minutes later. This time, her voice was calmer and mine was too, because shock had started turning into something sharper. She told me Daniel had promised her they would buy the duplex together, renovate it, rent one side, live in the other, and build something clean after his messy life with me ended. Something clean. That phrase made me look around the hotel room at the cheap lamp, the stiff bedding, my daughter's shoes abandoned by the door, and I thought about my mother's hands, cracked from washing them between patients, saving every spare dollar so I would have security after she was gone. Daniel had taken something sacred and called it startup money. Then Vanessa sent me screenshots, messages, voice notes, photos of documents, a picture of Daniel holding keys in front of the Dayton apartment. Another of him standing beside a for sale sign at the duplex, smiling like a man whose future had already begun. And then came the one that stopped me cold. It was a screenshot of a message Daniel had sent Vanessa 2 days before my mother died. Once Claire gets the estate money, I'll move fast. She'll be too devastated to fight details. I stared at that sentence until the room blurred. This was not betrayal. This was predation. I had thought my lowest point was burying my mother, but sitting in that hotel room, reading proof that my grief had been part of his timing, I understood that Daniel had not simply waited for me to be weak. He had counted on it. The next morning, I met the divorce attorney Mr. Harlan recommended, a woman named Marisol Grant, who read every document without interrupting me once. When she reached Daniel's message about me being too devastated to fight details, she looked up and said, "Claire, this changes everything." For the first time in days, I felt air enter my chest. Marisol filed emergency motions, challenged the transfer, flagged the alleged forged home equity documents, and told me to freeze whatever accounts I could before Daniel had time to move the money again. By noon, Daniel was calling nonstop. By 1, his texts turned cold. By 3, they turned desperate. By 4, he wrote one sentence that told me Vanessa had not been the only woman he had lied to. You have no idea what else I had to do to keep us afloat. I showed Marisol the message. She stared at it, then asked quietly, "Claire, do you know anything about a second mortgage on your mother's house?" My mouth went dry, because my mother's house had already been sold, and Daniel had handled the closing paperwork while I was choosing her urn. For a few seconds after Marisol asked me about a second mortgage on my mother's house, I could not answer, because the question did not fit inside any version of grief I understood, and my brain kept reaching for some ordinary explanation. Some misplaced document, some closing fee I had forgotten, some boring legal mistake that would not mean Daniel had put his hands on the last home my mother ever owned. But Marisol did not look like a woman asking a casual question. She looked like a woman who had already seen something ugly on paper. "My mother's house was sold," I said slowly, feeling each word scrape through my throat. The money from that sale was part of the estate, and Daniel helped because I couldn't handle every call after she died. Marisol turned her laptop toward me. There was a title company name I recognized, my mother's address, and a payoff line I had never seen before, attached to a private lender in Indiana. The amount was $48,000. The date was 2 weeks before closing. My name appeared in the authorization notes. I had never authorized anything. I stared at the screen while the room tilted around me, because suddenly my mother's inheritance was not the beginning of Daniel's theft. It was just the moment I had finally seen the edge of it. He had moved before the funeral. He had moved before the check. He had moved while I was still sitting beside my mother's hospital bed, holding a paper cup of bad coffee, listening to machines breathe beside her. Marisol clicked through the documents with the slow precision of someone building a map through a disaster, and every new page made the truth worse, because there were emailed authorizations from an address almost identical to mine. There were forms signed with a version of my signature that looked close enough to fool a tired clerk, and there were notes showing Daniel had presented himself as the grieving son-in-law helping settle affairs. I felt something inside me go silent. Not weak. Not broken. Silent. There is a point where pain becomes too large to perform, and all you can do is sit very still while your old life burns without making another sound. Marisol said we would need forensic review, bank subpoenas, and immediate notice to the title company, and although her words were legal and careful, I heard the real meaning underneath. Daniel had not only betrayed me, he had used my grief as an access code. When I left her office, I sat in the parking lot and called Mr. Harlan because he had handled my mother's estate, and I needed to know whether he had seen anything strange before the closing. He was quiet for a long time after I explained what Marisol had found. Then he said something that made my skin turn cold. Daniel called me once, Claire. He asked if estate funds could be delayed if a beneficiary was medically incapacitated. I closed my eyes. What did you tell him? I told him that question was inappropriate unless it came from you directly. My hands started shaking around the phone. And when was that? He gave me the date. It was the morning after my mother's doctor told us she had only days left. I sat there in the car with traffic moving beyond the windshield, and I thought about Daniel standing in the hospital hallway that same morning, rubbing my back, telling me to go home and shower because he would stay with Mom for a while. I had thanked him. I had actually thanked him. That night, at the hotel, I told Lily and my son, Mason, only what they needed to know, because children do not deserve to carry adult crimes on their backs, but they also deserve enough truth to stop blaming themselves for the collapse happening around them. Mason cried first. He was 13 and still young enough to believe fathers could be wrong without becoming strangers, and when he asked whether Dad was going to jail, Lily turned away like the answer might cut her too deeply. I did not promise anything. I only told them we were safe for the night, that lawyers were helping, and that none of this was their fault. Lily looked at me for a long time, then whispered, "Was Grandma's money the reason he stayed?" That question hurt more than Daniel's worst text. Because I did not know. And because part of me was terrified the answer was yes. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the hotel. I do not know how he found us, but when the front desk called and said my husband was in the lobby asking to speak with me, my whole body went cold in a way that felt almost physical, like ice water moving through my veins. I told the clerk not to send him up. Then I called Marisol. Then I told the kids to stay in the room and not open the door for anyone. When I stepped out of the elevator, Daniel was standing near the lobby windows, looking exhausted, unshaven, and almost believable, which was the most dangerous version of him because pity had always been the door he used when control stopped working. He spread his hands slightly when he saw me. "Claire, we need to talk without lawyers twisting this." I stopped several feet away. "No." His face tightened, then softened again. "You think I'm a monster, but you don't know the pressure I was under." That sentence made me stare at him. Not because it surprised me. Because it confirmed that even now, with evidence stacked against him, he was still trying to make his choices sound like weather. Pressure. Stress. Bills. Mistakes. Anything except theft. Anything except cruelty. "You used my mother," I said. His eyes flickered. Only once. Then he lowered his voice. "I was trying to build something for us before everything fell apart." "For us?" I asked. "Or for Vanessa?" He looked away at her name, and that small turn of his head told me more than any confession could have. Then he stepped closer and said, almost gently, "You won't survive this fight, Claire. You don't understand money, courts, paperwork, any of it." For 15 years, that sentence might have worked. For 15 years, I might have heard concern instead of contempt. But that morning, standing in a hotel lobby with my children upstairs and my mother's stolen security printed in a folder under my arm, I finally understood that Daniel had never needed me to be stupid. He only needed me to believe he was smarter. So I looked at him and said, "I understand enough now." Before he could answer, two police officers walked through the sliding doors. Marisol had called them after I told her Daniel found the hotel. Daniel saw them, then looked back at me with pure hatred flashing through his face so quickly that I almost doubted it. But I did not doubt it anymore. I had spent years doubting my own eyes. I was finished paying that price. The officers did not arrest him that morning, but they documented the harassment, warned him not to contact me directly, and stood nearby while I returned to the elevator without looking back. When the doors closed, I finally let myself shake. Not cry. Shake. Because survival does not always feel brave when it is happening. Sometimes it feels like barely keeping your knees from folding. That afternoon, Vanessa sent one final message. She said she had turned over everything to Marisol, including bank screenshots, messages, and recordings Daniel had sent when he thought she was loyal to him, and then she wrote something I did not expect. I am sorry I believed him when he made you sound weak. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I typed back only one line. So am I. Because the truth was, I had believed him too. 3 weeks after Daniel walked into that hotel lobby and tried to make me feel small one more time, I sat in a courtroom in downtown Columbus with Marisol on one side, a folder of bank records in front of me, and my mother's small gold bracelet wrapped around my wrist like the only steady thing left from the life I had before. Daniel sat across the aisle with an attorney I had never seen before, wearing a navy suit that looked too new and a face that looked practiced, and when the judge asked about the inheritance transfer, he lowered his eyes just enough to appear ashamed without ever looking truly sorry. That was Daniel's gift. He could make guilt look like pain. He could make control look like concern. He could make a theft sound like a misunderstanding if people gave him enough time to speak. But this time, he did not get the room alone. Marisol laid everything out slowly, calmly, and without drama, because facts do not need to scream when they are finally standing in the light. The LLC, the Dayton apartment, the duplex deposit, the forged home equity documents, the private lender connected to my mother's house, the fake email address, the messages to Vanessa, the line about me being too devastated to fight details. When Marisol read that sentence aloud, Daniel's attorney shifted in his chair, and Daniel stared at the table like the wood grain had suddenly become very interesting. I did not look away, not because I was strong every second. I was not. My hands were sweating, my stomach hurt, and part of me still could not believe this was the same man who had once danced barefoot with me in our kitchen after our daughter took her first steps. But I had learned something painful by then. A good memory does not cancel a cruel pattern. The judge granted temporary orders freezing the disputed funds, blocking Daniel from moving property connected to Hawthorne Property Solutions, and requiring him to leave the marital home until the financial investigation could be completed. It was not a perfect victory. Nothing about that day felt clean. But when the judge said Daniel could not contact me except through attorneys, I felt my lungs open in a way they had not since my mother died. Outside the courtroom, Daniel tried to catch my eye. I kept walking. That was harder than people think. Walking away from a man like Daniel is not one choice. It is 100 small choices made while your heart is still remembering who you wanted him to be. 2 months passed before the full picture became clear, and by then the truth had become uglier than even Marisol expected, because Daniel had used business debt, fake authorizations, and emotional pressure like pieces of the same machine, moving money through accounts fast enough to make confusion look like consent. Vanessa cooperated. I never became friends with her, and I will not pretend we shared some beautiful sisterhood after the wreckage, because pain does not become poetic just because two women were lied to by the same man. But she gave Marisol the messages. She gave the recordings. She gave the receipts. And in the end, her anger helped protect the money my mother had meant for me and my children. Daniel did not go to prison immediately, though there were investigations and consequences that followed him longer than he expected. But he lost access to the accounts, lost control of the story, and lost the one thing he had always counted on most: my silence. The duplex deal collapsed. The apartment lease ended. The LLC became evidence instead of an escape plan. Our home equity line was challenged. The forged documents were reviewed, And after months of ugly meetings, legal letters, and nights when I woke up at 3 in the morning convinced I had missed some hidden disaster, a settlement forced Daniel to return most of what he had taken. Not all of it. That part still hurts. People love endings where everything stolen comes back, where justice arrives perfectly dressed and every wound closes neatly before the credits roll. Real life does not work that way. Some money was gone. Some trust was gone. Some version of my children's father was gone too, even though the man himself still existed somewhere with explanations ready. But my mother's inheritance did not disappear into his new life. That mattered. Her last gift still helped us breathe. I rented a smaller house across town near Lily's school, with beige walls, loud pipes, and a front porch that leaned slightly to one side. And the first night we slept there, Mason asked if we were poor now. I almost cried. Then I told him the truth. No, honey, we are rebuilding. Lily stayed quiet for a long time after everything happened, and sometimes I caught her watching me when she thought I was not looking, as if she was trying to understand how a woman could be fooled and still be worth respecting. That was the part one hated most. Not Daniel's affair. Not the money. Not even the humiliation. I hated that my daughter had to see how expensive blind trust can become. One evening, months later, she came into the kitchen while I was paying bills, stood beside me without saying anything, and finally asked if Grandma would be disappointed that I had signed those papers. That question went through me like a blade. I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop, the legal folder beside my coffee, the cheap curtains I still had not replaced, and I thought about my mother clipping coupons at the dining table, not because she was afraid of life, but because she respected how quickly life could turn. No, I told Lily. She would be angry that someone used my grief, but she would not be disappointed that I trusted my husband. Lily nodded, but her eyes filled. Then she whispered, I think she'd be proud you stopped. That was when I finally cried. Not the panicked crying from the first weeks. Not the shocked crying from the hotel. This was different. This was grief finally reaching the woman my mother had tried to raise. A year later, my divorce became final on a rainy Thursday morning, and when I walked out of the courthouse, I did not feel triumphant, because losing a marriage is still losing something, even when the marriage had become a trap. But I felt clear. I had my own bank account, my own attorney, my own passwords, my own copy of every document connected to my life. And for the first time in years, nobody in my house could turn confusion into control. I drove to the cemetery before going home. The grass was wet, the sky was gray, and my mother's headstone looked smaller than I remembered. I stood there with my coat pulled tight and told her I was sorry. Sorry I had been careless with what she left. Sorry I had let someone else explain money to me like I was a child. Sorry I had mistaken being loved for being protected. The wind moved through the trees behind me, and for a moment I imagined her answering in that tired, practical voice she used whenever life got too dramatic. Then learn, honey. So I did. I learned that love does not require financial blindness. I learned that grief is not the time to hand over control. I learned that a man who rushes you while you are broken is not rescuing you. He is using the fact that you cannot stand steady. And I learned that protecting yourself does not mean you love someone less. Sometimes it means you finally love yourself enough to stop signing away your own life. A few months after the divorce, an envelope arrived at my new house with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Daniel and Vanessa, standing in front of the Dayton apartment, smiling like two people who thought nobody would ever find the foundation under their lie. On the back, someone had written only one sentence. You were never the weak one. I never found out whether Vanessa sent it. Maybe she did. Maybe someone else did. Maybe it does not matter. I put the photo in the bottom drawer of my desk, not because I wanted to remember Daniel, but because I wanted to remember the woman I became after him. Then I locked the drawer, walked into the kitchen, and helped Lily fill out her first college financial aid form. This time, I read every line myself.